encontro um ano depois de chacoalharem o planeta com revelações que expuseram os maiores segredos do sistema de espionagem dos americanos e seus aliados. Desta vez num quarto de hotel em Moscou, a milhares de quilômetros de Hong Kong, onde o ex-agente da NSA, a Agência de Segurança Nacional dos Estados Unidos, Edward Snowden, entregou ainda não se sabe quantos documentos ultra-secretos para o jornalista Glenn Greenwald, americano radicado no Brasil, e para a documentarista, também americana, Laura Poitras.
You know, it was so good to see them again. They've walked through hell and back to report this story, and you know, they've really been put under a microscope, put under scrutiny by all the most powerful governments in the world. And I think they stayed on the right side of the line. They worked to minimize harm, and they worked to maximize public gains again and again and again. And you can tell when I give them a hug, I see that they understand that, you know, they have gone through probably one of the hardest years of their lives. And they've come out on the other side with their heads held high.
Os documentos, publicados principalmente pelo jornal inglês The Guardian, pela TV Globo e pelo americano Washington Post, revelaram que os americanos monitoram bilhões de pessoas no planeta, registrando a chamada metadata. Quem falou com quem, quando, por quanto tempo. Também registra todo o conteúdo de comunicações por e-mail, telefone ou redes sociais de vários países. Espionam empresas, a chinesa Huawei, de tecnologia de comunicação, a Gazprom, estatal russa de gás e petróleo, e a brasileira Petrobras. Até o Ministério das Minas e Energia do Brasil foi hackeado com a ajuda da espionagem do Canadá. Chefes de Estado têm suas conversas telefônicas e até mensagens de texto interceptadas. A presidente Dilma Rousseff foi um dos alvos. A chanceler alemã Angela Merkel também descobriu que suas ligações eram ouvidas e reagiu forte. O assunto foi parar na ONU. Embaraçou autoridades americanas, pegas no flagra, espionando aliados. E Snowden, que de Hong Kong tentava fugir para a América do Sul, foi parado no meio do caminho. O governo americano revogou seu passaporte. Snowden ficou quase 3 meses no limbo, na área de trânsito do Aeroporto Internacional de Moscou, sem poder entrar no país nem sair. Em agosto do ano passado, conseguiu asilo na Rússia. Edward Snowden se apresentou como responsável pelo vazamento logo que os primeiros documentos foram publicados. Segundo ele, para evitar que inocentes fossem perseguidos. Mas desde então, se afastou dos holofotes. Na semana passada, após indicar em que hotel deveríamos nos hospedar em Moscou, ele apareceu à nossa porta, pronto para falar.
You didn't do any interviews for a year, with a few exceptions of the Washington Post, one email interview with us. Why? Why did you decide now to come forward and give this interview?
So for me, when the story broke, I didn't want to be a distraction. I didn't want people to look at me, to think about me, instead of thinking about the issues. The problem was the media in a number of countries was just, they're so fascinated with the people involved that they won't leave it alone no matter what. So people still talked about me, and I stayed away to try to discourage it, but it didn't work. However, what's amazing is that in the course of the last year, despite the distraction that the media, used pursuing me, is that the debate continued to grow. And because of that, I'm confident that today, now, nearly a year on from the initial revelations, I can talk about things, I can talk about how I feel, and it's not going to take away from the debate. It's no longer a distraction. I can't take anything away from that. So I feel it's safe for me to discuss my feelings.
Vamos começar pelo começo, quando o garoto de Maryland abandonou a escola sem terminar o ensino médio.
What are your influences?
I've had so many influences in my life that I don't like to pick out one. If I were to pick any single influence, without going into books specifically, without going into academic influences, I would say it's the internet. I am a child of the internet.
How about people, family, friends that influenced you?
Like I think everybody, Anyone who has the benefit of close family ties can't help but be influenced by them. I don't like to talk about my family because it's very private. They didn't ask to be a part of this, and I don't want to drag them into my politics and my story. But you know, I've been inspired by the integrity of the people around me throughout my life. People who have been faced with really hard choices that were really uncomfortable, but somehow they found the strength to do what was right.
How did you learn about computers?
It was very natural. It was organic. I was kind of self-taught. I was fascinated with technology. When my father brought a computer home for the first time, or brought me into his office, and I used a computer there, I wanted to understand it. And then eventually I became that child who was always taking apart things, disassembling the toaster, and then not knowing how to put it back together. But then I had the benefit of a family that was smart enough to make the decision that if I'm going to take something apart, it should be something that I like, that I need to use, not the toaster oven. So when I take apart my video game, or whatever children are interested in, I can't use it until I figure out how to put it back together. And that was very helpful to me because it helped me begin to learn to understand things in a systematic way.
After 9/11, you decided to join the armed forces and go to Iraq. What happened?
So I didn't actually go to Iraq. I volunteered to do so because I believed in what the government was saying at the time, which was that the government of Iraq was creating weapons of mass destruction. They were planning to terrorize people around the world, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and that the leadership of Iraq was a dictator, and the people there were desperate for freedom. And I thought it was selfless, it was a noble thing to try to help free these oppressed people and to do some good for the world. When I got to the Army, there was an interesting political awakening because I saw that many people there were not interested in doing particular good for the world. They weren't necessarily interested in contribution. They were thinking about either the benefits of service or they were trying to fill some sort of macho image. What I can say is that there were plenty of good people in the military who I respected, and they were better built for service than I was because I had an injury and I didn't make it through training.
And how did you start to work for the spying community?
It was actually very shortly after I left the military. I applied for a position in the national security community as a security specialist. And because of that, I had to go through clearance, background investigations, and that allowed me to begin using my technical skills at a very high level. And this was without a college degree. This was without any normal track record of this behavior. And it was very valuable because it gave me a chance to see a larger world and contribute at a very high level.
At which point you began to feel uncomfortable with the things you were seeing at work?
It was really sort of a gradual awakening because I've always been what I call a true believer in the value and decency of the United States and its traditions, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our protections for freedom of speech, freedom of association, the right to a fair trial, due process, face your accusers, self-defense, all of these things that have existed for hundreds of years. So it was very difficult for me to become skeptical that there were officials in our government that weren't really interested in our traditions, that weren't really interested in our values, so much as they were interested in the pursuit of power. So it took me many years and exposure to many different things to begin to go, are we really, as a government, trying to do everything in the least intrusive and most responsible way? It's been not that they were trying to be evil, it's not that there's some evil empire in the United States, these officials, they're so insulated from the public by boundaries of classification and secrecy and unaccountability, where they can make a mistake or they can commit some crime and never be asked to answer for it. It allows them to act without thinking. And when you're the most powerful organization in the world, that's a very dangerous thing. But one bad decision from the most powerful government official in the world can affect millions of lives, even billions. And because of that, we need to have very strict controls, and we need to have a very high standard of responsibility in the top officials of our governments.
At which point did you decide to collect the documents and make them public?
The point of no return for me was when I saw James Clapper in front of the American Congress. He's the Director of National Intelligence, the most senior sort of spy official in the United States, the man who I was working for, more or less, raise his hand and swear an oath to tell the truth to the Congress on TV in front of the American people. And he was asked a question, does the United States collect the communications or collect any kind of records at all, on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? And he said no. But I knew that was a lie, because I could see the systems that showed exactly that. What was amazing was that the congressman who asked the question also knew it was a lie. And all of the members of the committee that was questioning this official, they also knew it was a lie. But they didn't correct the record. They didn't ask him to amend his statement. They just let it sit. And that's that central point, where if our most senior officials aren't accountable, if they can lie, if they can abuse their power and not face any consequence, it encourages more of the same behavior. We get a less accountable government that becomes more and more dangerous, not just to individuals, not just to privacy, but to the concept of liberty, the concept of freedom. Because when we think about all the reporting of last year, it's not about privacy, it's about liberty. To what extent should individuals be free? To what extent should we be able to call our friends, to talk to our girlfriend or our boyfriend, to ride the bus across town, to buy a book, to check out something at the library, to watch a movie, without that being recorded and watched? I think, and traditionally what we've always done, is required, if the government is going to intrude into an individual's private life, that they have to have some reason for it, that they go to the judge and they say, we need to watch this person, we think this person's involved in criminal activity. If we watch everyone in society all the time, if we watch every man, woman, and child from the time they're born until the time they die, if we create records of all of their activities, can they be said to be free? It has an effect on human behavior, because when we know we're being watched, we change what we do.
Brasileiros são reconhecidos no mundo inteiro como aficionados de videogames. O que poucos sabem é que jogando online podem ser espionados.
Even video games are watched by the NSA?
Yeah, actually video games are specifically watched by the National Security Agency, by the British Intelligence Agency, and other intelligence agencies around the world, I'm sure. In the United States, they claimed that video games would be used as a method of communicating for terrorists or spies. But it's really crazy, I think, because video games are insecure methods of communication. There's no encryption, there's no protection. And these companies, the companies that run the video games, they typically log the conversations for abuse, to see if people are saying bad things, if they're committing some fraud. So why would terrorists use it? Why would spies use it? It doesn't make sense. But yes, the NSA has been monitoring it regardless. There are stories in the newspaper about it.
Some people say that collecting metadata is not that harmful because they are not watching the content, which we know now that is not true, that some of the content is collected and stored. What is so important about collecting metadata? What is so dangerous about it?
The problem is, when you assign a detective to follow someone, it's very costly, it's very invasive, you violated this person's sense of privacy, but because it's so expensive, It's only used when it's absolutely necessary, when the government knows we have a very good reason to do this. Metadata makes it almost free. There's almost no cost associated with it. So what do? Metadata monitoring that happens on a mass scale, and today we monitor metadata around the world. It's pervasive global surveillance. Means the United States government and other intelligence agencies around the world have assigned private detectives to follow all of us, every citizen, every man, woman, and child, around in all of our daily activities, to write logs of those activities and put them in a bucket, even though they don't need them today, just in case they want to know what you did some other time.
One thing that people ask very frequently is, how did a 29-year-old have access to all those classified documents? How did you access them?
There's sort of been a misinformation occurring in the U.S. media that was then propagated by the international media, which was that I was some low-level employee and I didn't really have any understanding of these materials. I was actually functioning at a very senior level. I had written policies on behalf of the United States government. I had I had been in meetings with the very top technical officials in the NSA and the CIA. The CIA's chief technology officer I had met with. And my role in some of these positions was when the U.S. government, when the Central Intelligence Agency, for example, had a technical problem that they simply couldn't solve, they needed experts, technical experts from private industries who had wide experience in all of these different areas to suggest, how can we do this? How can we fix this? How can we come up with a solution? And that was my job. I was what's called a systems administrator, or a super user, which means that I had more access than almost any other official in the intelligence community. Because even the director of the National Security Agency or the Central Intelligence Agency or any of these things, when they want to see some document, when they want to understand some program, they have to ask for someone, show me this, tell me about this, brief this for me. As a systems administrator, you are the person who can see all of that, because you are the one who controls all of the information.
Why didn't you release all the documents in a website, for instance, or to WikiLeaks that would publish all of them?
Well, first off, I think what WikiLeaks does is very important, and I think they have a role in the press. I think they're incredibly courageous, and they take risks that other organizations run away from. At the same time, I had a very specific intention that I wanted to approach in my own way. I could have taken these materials and published them online myself, just sort of thrown them up in the air and let anybody go through them. But I didn't, because I felt the way that I could minimize my own political biases, my own judgments, and make sure that the public interest is always served, is by partnering with responsible journalists, by big institutions, major newspapers who I have a lot of trust in. I wanted to submit it to a system of checks and balances. Organizations like The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Globo, Der Spiegel, all of these organizations, their editors could say, hey, we think maybe we should minimize this because it might cause some risk to some individual. And then they could go to the government and ask the government, is this dangerous? Is there something we don't know about this story? Can you tell us something that we should avoid, that we should remove, just to be safe? And by doing this, I can take myself out of the equation, make sure that I'm not making decisions for a whole country, for a whole government, for anything like that. And instead we can let the free press do what it does best, which is help citizens become informed voters and think about the kind of societies that they want to live in. Did
you read all those documents?
Yeah.
Do you know exactly what's in every one of them?
Yeah, I think Glenn's actually on the record. He's mentioned that all of the documents that he received were categorized, they were organized, they had been labeled. Yeah, I evaluated all of the documents that were provided to journalists through one means or another.
There's not a single week passed by this past year without a new document, a new revelation about the activities of the NSA and the Five Eyes. Is there still more to come?
I'll leave the news to the journalists.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot more to come. The system is unbelievably vast.
Sorry about the Português. Ainda tem mais revelações sobre o Brasil?
Com certeza tem mais documentos que vai mostrar brasileiros e o mundo que os Estados Unidos está fazendo dentro do Brasil e também o Inglaterra e outros países também.
Daqui a pouco, Snowden fala da vida na Rússia, do que espera do futuro e a impossibilidade de voltar para os Estados Unidos, onde enfrentaria um processo por traição.